can see, we're absolutely surrounded by small boats, which really isn't surprising, because I'm right in the middle of Bristol Dock on what is Bristol Maritime Carnival Day. And it's an event which every year attracts thousands of visitors. The Bristol Historic Harbour, as it's now called, really comes alive on major occasions like this, and there have been lots of them in recent years. But not so long ago, such a spectacle would have been unimaginable in what was very much an industrial environment. But the process of transformation into a pleasant area that the general public could use for leisure and recreational purposes began in the mid-1970s, and it's a development that's been welcomed by Bristolians and visitors alike. The port of Bristol lies on that other great West Country river, the Avon, and although it's some 7 or 8 miles upstream from the estuary of the mighty River Severn, it's thrived as a port for centuries. Now that's because the safe harbour here made it a focus of attention for the scores of commercial vessels that plied for trade up and down the River Severn. But also, and perhaps more importantly, it was ideal for the much larger ships that left this part of the West Country to trade with the rest of the world. And dotted all around this dockside, you'll find reminders of that illustrious past. This recently unveiled sculpture by Stephen Joyce, for example, is of John Cabot, the most famous name in Bristol's seafaring history. After setting out from here in 1497, he discovered America. And his little ship, the Matthew, is remembered too, in the form of this magnificent weather vane. The engineering genius of Isambard Kingdom Brunel is honoured in this modern statue by John Doubleday. The SS Great Britain was just one of Brunel's creations in the city. Launched in 1843, she was the first vessel to incorporate all the elements of the modern liner, and she was part of his grand plan to link London and New York through Bristol by rail and steamer. Also right on the quayside, there's the Maritime Heritage Centre, the National Lifeboat Museum and the Industrial Museum, which recently undertook the restoration of the oldest Bristol-built ship still afloat, the Mayflower. Built as a tugboat in 1861, she's the oldest working steamship in the country. Memories of those great days of steam are also kept alive by the Harbour Railway and the rather curiously shaped Fairbairn steam crane of 1876. Both of them are now also in the care of the Industrial Museum. On a more artistic level, there's the statue of the sea god Neptune, cast in 1723. And a new addition to the scene, Sabrina, the goddess of the Severn. She's the work of the Scottish sculptor Gerald Lang. But there's one aspect of Bristol's maritime history that has no memorial of any kind, though many believe that it should. And that's the city's prominent role in the slave trade, a vile business that brought death and misery to millions of Africans. This is how it worked. The ships would make a sort of triangular journey. They would set out from Bristol, laden with alcohol, with guns, with fabric and so on, and sail to West Africa, where they would exchange those goods for slaves. Hundreds of men, women and children who'd been captured or kidnapped by the local native slave traders. These poor souls would then be stacked into the ships, rather like sardines, in the most inhumane conditions, and taken across to the West Indies and to America, and sold into slavery to work on the plantations. Now, the proceeds from that sale would then be used to restock the ships with cotton, with tobacco, and with sugar, and they would then sail back on the third leg of that triangular journey here into Bristol. But finally, in 1833, slavery was brought to a halt, though not before quite a few Bristolians had made themselves a tidy fortune, certainly enough to keep them and their heirs in the lap of luxury. Which is why here in this city you'll find many fine houses, not to mention schools and even churches that were built with what nowadays we would consider to be tainted money. Two beautiful tall-masted sailing ships have now made this their home between filming assignments, and they're an eye-catching asset to the docks. But for the moment, the crowds are more interested in a collection of craft that are anything but shipshape and Bristol fashion. The raft race is underway. Today's event, which is organised by the Bristol Round Table, is in aid of charity. So the participants and visitors don't just enjoy themselves, it's all in a good cause. Between the two world wars, the city docks managed to remain commercially viable. They could never recapture the trade that they'd lost to the larger docks that had been built at the mouth of the Avon, but many Bristolians will remember seeing busy scenes like this. After the last war, trade declined even further, and by the late 60s, dereliction had set in. Then the City Council embarked on plans to turn the docks into an area where people would want to live, work and spend their leisure time. Some of the dockside buildings, like these bonded warehouses, survive as yet untouched. But other warehouses, like this rather ornate example dating from late Victorian times, have become shops, galleries, cafes and so on. For me, though, the most impressive piece of conservation is this functional but very stylish edifice. Originally built in the 1830s as a tea warehouse, it's now been converted into an arts centre. There's a lot of new building too, but although housing developments like this have won design awards, the result hasn't been what the City Council envisaged. The aim was to create homes that would suit the pocket of every social class. Instead, they're so expensive that only the well-off can afford to buy them. And these developments have threatened other dock residents. There are now less mooring sites for houseboats, and their owners, who believe that they bring character and a necessary breath of real life to the docks, fear that they'll be squeezed out of existence. New office buildings bring planning problems too, like ensuring that they fit in with their surroundings. So regenerating a dockland site is by no means plain sailing. I'm now boarding the Balmoral, a pleasure cruiser that's going to take us down through the Avon Gorge and back out onto the Severn Estuary. I must say this is all very grand compared to the very much smaller craft I've been on so far. And there's even a running commentary.
On the right-hand side as we go forward, that's the starboard side, perhaps you can see a statue of that man, Samuel Plimsoll, the man responsible for the safety line on the side of ships.
And so we're underway, and there's still plenty to look at. On the right, for example, is part of the district of Hot Wells. As the name suggests, there was a hot spring here. But one colonnade is all that remains of a spa that once even rivaled Bath. Then there's the bricked-up entrance to the long-abandoned Clifton Rocks Railway. And of course, up there's the Clifton Suspension Bridge, the city's most famous landmark, designed by Brunel. Sadly, he didn't live to see it completed. Cruising has been going on in this part of the world for about 100 years, and for most of that time it's been the paddle steamer that's done the cruising. In the first half of this century, P&A Campbell's White Funnel fleet had 11 paddle steamers like this one, all working flat out during the season. There's only one seagoing paddle steamer left in the world today, the Waverley, and both she and the Balmoral are now run by the Paddle Steamer Preservation Society. Every year between them they carry about 100,000 passengers on day trips in the Bristol Channel area. But Commander Tom Foden of the Preservation Society remembers the days when the steamers were also a very good way of simply getting from A to B.
Very much so. I mean, I remember well enough going over from Bristol to, say, Ilfracombe or to Stay, not going by road because it was almost impossible. Certainly from Bristol to Cardiff, I mean, many people did. The Severn Bridge really killed that, though. Although, believe me, my latest experience of the Severn Bridge, I think I'd rather go by this ship now.
And over the years there have been some absolutely marvellous ships going up and down this river, haven't there? We're on the Balmoral, and that has a marvellous story about how it came back into being, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it just shows you what can be done. I mean, this society, bless their hearts, they worked damn hard. The ship was rotting in Dundee as a restaurant ship. They've got it going again. Look at it, it's nice and clean, respectable, and we managed to keep it going and keep it going quite well.
And the Waverley, of course, is the other one that everyone remembers with those wonderful paddles, but we don't see that too often now.
No, we don't, because it has to go all around the British Isles by the charter. You see, this is a charity trust to give everyone a chance at seeing it during the year. So we only get it down here for 2 or 3 weeks in the spring and 2 or 3 weeks in the autumn.
But people love to see that old boat, don't they?
Oh yes, we're damn lucky here in Bristol. We get it more often than London. We get it more often than anywhere in the British Isles except the Clyde. So we get our money's worth. We're very lucky.
You've been doing this job now for about 11 years, so you must know every inch of this particular stretch of the Avon as it runs into the Severn. What pleasure do you get out of the river?
Well, I don't know. You know, I've been at sea all my life, and I find it's great fun. And I like to see people enjoying themselves, letting them come to sea, knowing that we've still got ships that float. It's all good stuff. It all mixes in with everything I've been taught. I enjoy it.
Now we're passing under the Avon Bridge, opened in 1974. Box girder bridge, carrying the M5 motorway.
Here, yet more reminders that these waters are becoming increasingly popular with small pleasure craft. But in the hard commercial world of the big ships, there's been a rather different story. To boost flagging trade, in the 1970s, the Port of Bristol Authority, which already owned the docks at Avonmouth and Portishead, built the Royal Portbury Dock. It could accommodate even larger ships and was designed primarily for the container trade. But the special cranes are now hardly used, and 2 of the 6 berths are still undeveloped. Unfortunately for Portbury, the container trade became concentrated on the ports that lie on the east coast. Being closer to Europe, they were far more convenient for shipping. The Port of Bristol has an annual loss of about £3.5 million, and Portbury contributes greatly to that loss, even though it's one of the country's top timber and car importers. About 130,000 vehicles come into the country through here every year. But there is hope on the horizon. Recent figures indicate that the port has reversed its downward trend. Between the Royal Portbury Dock and Portishead, which we're now approaching, there's a strip of coast that's been a source of major conflict between developers and conservationists. There's a plan to turn 1,200 acres of it into a new town, with 5,000 homes, a hotel, shops and recreation areas. But conservationists have pointed out that this bit of coast is an integral part of a whole network of wildlife habitats that exist in the Gordano Valley. And because the valley has a high water table combined with peaty soil, it's one of the most important wetland sites in the British Isles. It supports a rich variety of marsh-loving birds, insects and plants, some of them very rare. And the Avon Wildlife Trust and the Nature Conservancy Council have 300 acres of it under their protection in the heart of the valley. If the development plan for the coastal strip does eventually go ahead, let's hope there'll be some form of compromise. In Portishead itself, there are some very noteworthy architectural features. At one end of the high street, where the sea wall used to be, stands the White Lion. It was once a mill driven by tidal power, and one of the old millstones has been preserved. This hexagonal tower is said to have been erected by an Elizabethan ship owner who wanted to admire his vessels out on the estuary from the comfort of his own home. And this splendid clock tower dominates what was the nautical school, a marvellous example of Edwardian building. It narrowly escaped demolition a few years ago and is now being converted into a place for people to live in rather than learn in. There are some grand Victorian houses too. But dominating the skyline are the two remaining chimneys of the power station built in the 1920s. Visitors have been coming here on day trips from Bristol since the 1720s, and they usually make their way to Woodhill Bay. The lake was created in 1910, and it's now a venue for national competitions for radio-controlled boats. And there are other distractions. Apart from the general view, what's on the other side of the sea wall is ignored by almost everyone. And even when the tide goes out, there seems to be little reason to go down onto the foreshore. But apparently, if you're interested in natural history or geology, this is one of the most rewarding spots in the West Country. Charles Kopp of the Bristol Museum certainly believes that it's well worth a visit. Well, I know appearances can be deceptive, but all I can see is grass and a load of mud. What is so fascinating about this area?
Well, it's not half an hour since this whole area was completely covered in seawater, and now we're stood on what looks like quite a normal grassy field almost. This is what's very interesting about these salt marshes that we have in the estuary. They're full of interesting plants that can survive incredibly harsh conditions. If you think of plants like this sea aster here, which is related to the asters that you grow in the garden. This is a very special one, and in that it can survive being completely covered by the sea. Unlike the sea aster, which has got the very fleshy stems to store fresh water and keep the salt out, the Spartina grass, the rice grass here, has very tightly rolled up stems to protect it. It's a very unusual species in that it's a natural hybrid of an English and an American grass, which has been planted here specifically because it's so vigorous that it can bind the mud, and in fact in the estuary has in places raised the level of the salt marsh by 1.5 metres in about 35 years. So it's very, very vigorous.
Is it vigorous to the detriment of other things that grow on
Yes,
marsh?
one of the problems is that when you cover the mud like this, species of plant which rely on open mud to drop their seeds and grow, like the marsh samphire, I think there's some just down here, are actually driven out. You can see there's just one small piece attempting to grow by this muddy pool. Let's see if I can get some up. It's a very interesting plant. Its other name is glasswort, and it was called that because it used to be used in the glass making industry. It was burnt to release soda for making soda glass. But it's also been eaten for a lot of years. It's a very strong, piquant flavour. Do try some.
This was, as you say, covered by water just
yes,
a little while ago.
A little bit salty.
Yeah.
It's really quite tasty.
And got a sort of texture of celery, isn't it? Not bad.
You can eat it either fresh or in Norfolk it used to be harvested in large amounts and pickled. There's a very favourite pickle. The problem with this species though is that it's an annual species and it must drop its seeds onto open mud. And so when the Spartina comes in, obviously as you can see here there's very little mud left, and so eventually we lose our native plants to the Spartinas. The mud is quite useful in itself. People tend to find it not very pretty to look at, but it's full of small snails and things which birds feed off of. If you were to take a tea strainer and just run it through the mud and wash it out, you would find it was absolutely full of tiny snails called hydrobias, and they're the main food of the shell duck. They've got a very strange beak with serrations down the side, and they walk along the mud, sucking up the mud like this and pressing it out with their tongue, and they end up with a mouthful of snails. That is their main diet, and that's so important that in the late summer, when ducks have to lose all their flight feathers in a moult, they come from all over Britain to this area because it's one of the very few places in Britain where it's safe and with enough food for them to go through that moult period. So the mud is very important for certainly shell duck, and many other species of bird come down to feed in the winter especially.
Of course, your other great interest here, Charles, is not just in the natural history, but also in the geology. And what's rather special about it?
Well, just in the space of a fairly small bay, you can actually see what's gone on in this area for over 400 million years. The very fact that the estuary is where it is because the Earth was deeply faulted and twisted over 200 million years ago. And the cliffs that we see on the side of the estuary now were first formed at that time and buried deeply under other sediments which have since been stripped off. Well, this is part of the beach I was referring to, only a few hundred yards from where we were before, and one of the most exciting places in the area for me because of the fact that here in the space of just a few feet you can actually take a walk back through time over 400 million years just in one step. I can actually stand with 1 foot 400 million years ago and 1 foot 200 million years ago with the rocks we're dealing with.
How can you tell that, Charles, from what we're looking at here?
The relationships of the rocks here are very special. This rock above us, if you look, you can see it's actually made of cobbles and lumps of the underlying rock. There are pieces of sandstone and pebbles all cemented together. And when we look at it in detail, we can actually show that this was a tongue of scree which worked its way down a steep hillside probably about 220 million years ago in a really hot desert environment, something like the Death Valley, California at the present day. And this valley, which the Severn's in, was actually here then as a shallow valley with saline lakes in it and these steep hillsides. In fact, these boulders have cut their way into the underlying rock so that we've got a smooth line there, a buried landscape, which the gap between the two rocks actually represents something like 100 million years of Earth history missing. And in that time, where we're standing now drifted from south of the equator up through areas as hot as the Kalahari into the equator with warm, shallow tropical seas, and then through Sahara-like conditions and onwards. This was long before there were even dinosaurs tramping about. In fact, dinosaurs just evolved as these top rocks were being deposited. What's even more spectacular to my mind is that if we actually look at the rocks, there are pebbles in them, and these underlying red sandstones, which were deposited themselves in a hot place, somewhere like the flat areas of Western Australia, a very hot desert with intermittent rivers. Those pebbles in that rock have been eroded out and taken up into the rock above, and you see them there, and they've been washed out again, eroded out once more, down onto the modern beach, where they're now once again pebbles on the beach. Some of these may be 600 million years old. It's a hard life.
Well, now in stark contrast to the very stately Balmoral, I'm continuing my journey southward, courtesy of the Mariner, the rescue boat of the Portishead Yacht and Sailing Club. Way to Clevedon, a seaside town that once had a pier, hasn't got one now, but will have one again soon, and I shall be finding out the whys and wherefores of that next week.
Kingfishers and red kites among the remarkable wildlife in Iolo's Welsh river valleys. From sea to source, uncover hidden wonders in a new series on BBC iPlayer.